So first
Still
of
in.
all, thank you to everyone for joining us on this evening, Thursday evening. We're going to be joined today by Laura, and we'll talk a little bit about Laura later. We are really proud that we get to put these webinars on because they are so informative and we have great feedback from learners. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to someone who is a professional in the industry and learn just so much from it. And tonight will be no different with Laura because we're going to focus on how to differentiate and support different distress behaviours. And our major aim for the end of the evening is that our learners are going to be more confident in supporting young people through challenging behaviour. And I know, as somebody who cares for children myself, that is often something we can be worried about, or even when we're setting up our child centred businesses, that we worry a little bit about. So Laura's going to help guide us this evening through all of that.
But yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for dropping in. I think I'll just go to the next slide while we start to chat. So huge thank you to Lorna for being my helper tonight, and a huge thank you to Renata and basically the whole team for helping us put this on tonight. If we haven't met before, I'm Laura Hellfeld, and you can find me over at Neurodivergent Nurse Consulting. And as you can see there, I'm multiply neurodivergent. I've got kids like myself, and I work independent and freelance to support my community members. I absolutely love it. And I love any opportunity like tonight where I get to share a bit more about us, or just some of the principles that I've learned for our community that really are inclusive of all young children. So again, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I think just because of time, I'm going to just jump right in because I love the questions and hopefully we have lots of time for those. Okay, well, actually, just as Lorna said, my opening sentence is about that idea that challenging behaviors, distress behaviors, emotional regulation, that is the number one thing people are concerned about or why they seek support. It was a huge concern of mine with my kiddos. I felt like I was just totally in the deep end and didn't know what I was doing. And I've had to learn and unlearn and relearn so many different things, still learning, to be fair. So I was going to do that whole thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this an area then for you as a childcare provider, you feel like is at that top of the list of things that you're working on, things that you feel like you could just use a few more tips?
I myself, Laura, actually, I'm a childminder, so I can say that stress behaviours and challenging behaviour is, as a childcare provider, often something we get quite anxious about.
Yeah, and I could totally see that because every kid is so different and what they need. And so a lot of my work is trying to figure out what are some of those foundation pieces, so that way, no matter what setting we're in or what kid it is, we can kind of have this instinct of how to respond, because it gets so difficult in the moment, doesn't it? It could get really overwhelming. So the next line on there is about the idea that tantrums and meltdowns are the terms that I would say I hear the most. They tend to get thrown out as the same. I tend to also use that connection seeking for tantrum, but I'm going to be using the language that I would say most of the population uses. And so these are things that it's really helpful to tease them apart because there's some slight differences in support, as we'll see coming up. And therefore, hopefully that gives you just, again, that more confidence in handling these scenarios. I'm just making sure I hit all my points on this. Yes. And that last area is about the idea that discussing the stress behaviors and just some of these beginning nuggets of information is really the building blocks of understanding kind of the bigger heavy hitters of boundaries and consequences. And being this 45-minute webinar, we can't touch on all of it, but we are going to start to. So hopefully when we get into some of the scenarios that we can touch on those. And again, I'm hoping to leave a bit more time at the end so we can clarify any of that. That end goal, or the goal at the end, is something that I'm really hoping we keep in the back of our minds throughout this whole time. And again, when we get to the couple case studies, is really be sitting back with that again of we want to be supporting, we want to be supporting, we want to be supporting, even if it feels like, oh, we're just in this argument again, this fight again. There's something to tease out here. All right. So tantrums and meltdowns. Typically, these have a very outward, visible reaction, hence why they catch our attention, and hence why we end up reacting back to them. They're not always outward, and we're going to touch on that. But again, we tend to see these as quite big behaviors, big emotions. There's that list below, and I'm curious if that sounds familiar to any of you with any of the kiddos that you help take care of, that any of that yelling, fighting, hitting a wall, throwing toys, biting. It's really, really common. And that point on the right, again, is about that idea of keeping the back of our mind. All of these behaviors are distress behaviors, and it's all communicating that there's a need. So again, let's keep that in front of our minds. It's communicating a need. I made a table because I like tables, being a science background. They just make me feel more comfortable. So on the left, I have that idea around tantrums. And a tantrum, there's something that the person wants or needs, that there's this purpose, there's this goal of theirs. They're trying to get something from you. So what it could be is a sweet, a toy, maybe your attention. So again, they're going to be engaging with you to try to get this thing. On the other hand is meltdowns. They're really different. It's something we talk about a lot in the neurodivergent community because unfortunately this happens to us quite often. This is someone who is just incredibly overwhelmed by other things going on in the environment, overwhelmed with their own emotions. And that second arrow is dysregulated. So that word, again, we're thinking of those things to kind of keep at the front of our minds, is one of those other ones. So I know I can't hear you or see you, but it was this idea of if we could together say dysregulated. So in your home, wherever you are, or in your car, or if you're out for a walk and listening, of just saying like 3 times dysregulated. So dysregulated, dysregulated, dysregulated. It is the main thing to think about with meltdowns, because what that means is reminding us that this is someone who is overwhelmed and incapable of decision making. They're in survival mode. So any rational thought just goes out the window. So what you often hear from people that don't really understand meltdowns, you end up hearing them say things like, they didn't even know what they wanted. They were just swatting me away. They were throwing the things away that I was trying to hand them. They were just saying no to everything. And again, that makes sense in meltdowns because the person's so overwhelmed that trying to communicate becomes incredibly difficult. So they're just going to kind of start swatting out and pushing things away and just saying no, because it might be a bit easier. They might not be saying anything at all. And so there's not really this goal in mind. It's just this overwhelm. And so again, those comments around, they didn't even know what they wanted. I couldn't even figure out trying to help them. Nothing I did helped. That's often that, like light bulb moment of, that was probably a meltdown. It's probably a meltdown. So the next table I put just really hones in on those couple differences, just to, again, make sure we have them. So with that tantrum is, there's a purpose. There's something that young person is looking to get. Again, on that right side, with the key word again, the dysregulation. So it is a reaction to something outside of their control, and they're very overwhelmed. Again, to something going on outside of them, something in the environment, maybe it's the dog barking, bright lights, or lots of feelings. I think we can all somewhat relate to that idea of, like, I don't like to feel angry. Angry to me feels just like so overwhelming, and my body reaction to it's so big. And when I was younger, that felt just too overwhelming to where I didn't know what to do with myself. It was just all this energy radiating. So we'll start with tantrums. So we have this slide and then a bit of a scenario to talk through. And we touched on the top part, but let's go into who gets them. We tend to talk about tantrums in littles, so that age range of 1 to 5. And that's usually because after that age, a lot of people have learned other strategies, usually more socially acceptable strategies to getting what they want, like manners. So instead of maybe grabbing something for you or, snatching something or yelling at you to get something, you would have realized from 3 and 4, oh, if I say, could I please have, I can get it pretty quickly. At the same time, let's be honest, we all get tantrums. So distress behavior just doesn't magically end. At some time. There's no age limit to distress behaviors. So I'd like us all to just kind of sit with that idea of, like raise of hands. If you can think of a time recently where, you might have used a tone with someone that you didn't weren't quite as proud of later. Maybe snapped at somebody. I don't think any of us can get away with saying, oh no, definitely not as an adult. I never did that. I think we can all relate to that, which is actually a really important point of remembering that these young kids are really just trying to figure out life. And we too, even at our ages, have these moments, get distressed and behave in ways that we're like, oops, that wasn't the best way of talking to that person. And on the right side, the arrow, boredom always shines out at me. I tend to tell people I am intolerable when I'm bored. I'm ADHD, so I'm always looking for some input to keep me going. If I'm bored, I tend to start bothering other people. So I very hard relate to this list. All right, so I put together a scenario to help us kind of put ourselves in this, I lost what I was going to say there, but wrote the scenario to make sure we can really tease out these pieces to recognize it. And then we're going to talk about in the next slide what we should be doing then during this tantrum time. So we've got Charlie. It's Thursday and it's Thursday evening, and Charlie has just finished football practice. It's about 5:30 and he is stoked to go home because last night his favorite show was on. Now it was late, so his parents recorded it for him and said, after football practice, you'll be able to watch your show. So football practice ends. Charlie is grabbing his stuff, headed to the car park, but mom's going the other way. So Charlie's like, oh no, and starts pulling on his mom. The mom wants to talk to the coach. So she puts up her hand, and it keeps talking to the coach. Charlie continues to pull on her arm. She ends up turning to Charlie and saying, stop it. And Charlie ends up throwing his water bottle and yelling that he wants to go home. So the idea, well, besides the huge hint at the top of the page, is how do we know this is what's going on? Well, there was a purpose, right? We talked about that idea of a tantrum tells us there's something that somebody wants. They're trying to get something. And in this scenario, Charlie really wants to watch this show. So what ends up happening is he really wants and really needs his mom's attention, doesn't he? Really, really needs it. So when he's pulling on her arm and he's doing it in order to get that communication with her, that connection with her. And then we also know it was more in that tantrum arena and making the decision to throw the water bottle because he's also looking at his mom. He continues that engagement with her. And then he's able to yell out what he wants. He wants to go home. Wants to go home. I'm going to move on. So we'll go back to what we should be doing in just a second, in case you're wondering. So when does this end? Well, typically this distress goes away if you just give them what they want. Or maybe they lose the person they're engaging with, that maybe that person leaves. Like if his mom had just kind of walked away, he would have no one to be trying to get their attention, or realizes they're just not going to get what they want with their current behavior. So what should we be doing in this scenario? Well, the first and foremost, like we said in the beginning of our chat, is that idea of these are all telling us that there's a need. So they're communicating they're in distress because he's really wanting communication and connection. We want to tell the young person and show the young person that we are listening, even if we can't manage that need in this exact moment. People want to be acknowledged. And when tempers kind of cool and there's more calm, we do want to then use that as a learning opportunity and help guide them to safer behavior, really, because there was some things that came up in that scenario that wasn't quite as safe. And so I guess we'll just dive into that a little bit. Is what should we do in that scenario? I would say it would have been great to have preempted the scenario. If Charlie's mom, when she was maybe crossing with Charlie as he's running to the car park and she's coming on in, to say to him, oh, I've got to talk to your coach for a minute. And he likely would have brought up, but I want to go home and watch my show. And then she could have brought up, oh, I needed to clarify the training schedule for next week. And, try to have, explain to him what's going on. But of course, we're also busy. I mean, it just happens, doesn't it? We have the best intentions. We usually do right by the kids the majority of the time, but we're so busy, and there's just times that we are just getting things done and kind of forget to communicate that we're doing them. I definitely fall into this bracket because by evening time, I often go into needing more non-speaking time. And so with my kids, we've realized I need to do a bit more notes actually to make sure they understand like what my thought process is. So it would have been great to have prevented it. But if we still got into the scenario we're in, as soon as mom would have realized, oh, my arm's getting pulled on, stopping and giving that moment of connection, that moment of attention of, I don't care for you to pull my arm, that hurts, and letting him know that that wasn't the safest way to get her attention. And then they could make a decision of like, oh, I need to talk for, let's say, 4 minutes. Let's put that timer on my phone. Do you want to play with my phone? And then that way, when it's going to be time to go. And for sure, we're going to watch your show when we get back. I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you that I needed to talk to your coach. Later, depending on then if Charlie was stressed or not, but just waiting until the time is, calmer, is continuing that conversation with Charlie. So it wouldn't really be helpful if he was upset in that moment, but waiting until about later that evening, even the next day is okay. And letting him know, you know what, that pulling on my arm hurt. So I'd like to figure out a different way for you to get my attention. Maybe it's a tap, maybe it's handing her something, or standing a certain way, doing some other nonverbal communication. And also discussing the idea of throwing the water bottle was not safe. We somewhat said in the beginning of this webinar that this is like the building blocks to understanding boundaries and consequences. And a non-negotiable boundary I talk about a lot is that idea of, you don't hurt yourself and you don't hurt other people. So throwing the water bottle could have been a really unsafe situation. It could have hit somebody, and that really would want to be part of the discussion with mom and Charlie. From theories and foundations that I base my work on, which is neuroaffirming, trauma-informed attachment, it's the idea that what we really want to focus in on is being able to build our connection with Charlie to be able to have those harder discussions. So he needs to feel safe with us and not be doing something out of fear. We need him to really sit with us and chat with us in an ongoing way. Again, about like that water ball of throwing. We don't want him to think of it in just kind of this one scenario. We want him to understand that actually goes to all settings and really understand that boundary around not hurting someone. Also, what ends up happening, if mom was to take away that TV show, what do we think the conversation would become about? I mean, just nonstop about that TV show, wouldn't it? Because Charlie would be like, well, I've been waiting all day. I have to watch it tonight. When can I watch it? And you were just getting further and further and further away from that actual conversation that needs to happen, which again was, I didn't really like how you were getting my attention because it hurt, and we don't throw water bottles like that. So again, we want to stay closer to what was important to us in that moment. And it was around safety and, not hurting anybody. So we're moving over to Meltdowns. And what was that magic word? Does anyone remember? We were repeating it. I'm sure you all were repeating it all by yourselves, especially if you're with other people and have earbuds in. I'm sure you were just all like, dysregulated, dysregulated, dysregulated. So again, let's keep that key term front of our minds. So again, this is someone who has become really out of control because they're in survival mode, because they feel incredibly unsafe. Something has happened in the environment, or their emotions have become really, really strong. So shutdowns is in the category of meltdowns. And so it goes back to that conversation at the beginning of, we think of distress behaviors as all the really outward, really big behavior, but actually shutdowns, with trying to think of how common they are. I mean, in our community, I would say the shutdowns is when we're really, really worried, and thinking of like burnout modes and stuff like that. But shutdowns are then crisis survival mode, but in that way of like really shutting yourself down. So it's not as visible to other people because it'll just look like you're the very quiet kid in the classroom. Or you're the very quiet kid at home that just kind of like is in their room, laying in their bed. And so that often isn't what gets other people's attention, because they're like, oh, they're just chilling. We want to be really mindful of this. So sometimes we do see people get actually limp, where they really can't control their bodies. Speaking becomes very, very difficult. Common statements with this one, on top of what we were saying about meltdowns, like just not sure what they want or what they need. Other ones are, they're just so defiant. I've asked them to move and they're just sitting there. They were having a strop and now they're just sitting there, or they're not responding to me. Why won't you just answer me? Those are moments to be thinking this person actually might be in a more shutdown mode, which can happen after a big outburst, because it might be like immense embarrassment, which adds to that layer of emotions. And now the person's just going to go, oh my gosh, I have to go into myself. So our scenario is going to touch on shutdowns. So that's great. For those that weren't as familiar, we'll cover that. And hopefully then that kind of clues you in. Who gets meltdowns? Well, like we like to say, meltdowns are inclusive. Everybody gets them. Any age. Kind of a ping in my brain is when someone will say to me, oh, well, my 12-year-old just has these massive tantrums every day, or multiple times a day. Usually it's where we're like, I bet they're one of us. So anyone can have a meltdown. At the same time, on the right, it has a table about some of the communities that are more affected by it because of then the reasons why, than on the left. So it is much more in the neurodivergent community, learning disabled, sensory processing differences, just because then there's more things that can feel really overwhelming. Yeah, so it's, again, for us, these conversations around behavior and linking back to distress are just every day for us. High executive function demands. If you were in any group or follow anybody who's an ADHDer, you'll see this term thrown out a lot because it's what we really struggle with. Executive function is the set of skills, kind of like at the front of the brain. It's that part that's really still developing in younger people and young adults. And it's skills such as emotional regulation, task initiation. So going, oh, I better start my homework, but I'm still sitting here. Having a goal, but understanding how to break that up into tasks, and stuff like taking past experience to now. So like with a young one, it might be, okay, well, I got dressed yesterday, but what do I do today to get dressed? I kind of don't remember. Like, what did that look like? What did I do? Where did I find everything? Build up a triggers, it'd be that, like that saying always comes to mind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was just too bright, too loud. Now it's too crowded. Now it's smelly. It's just like, now I'm just done. Loss of autonomy. We talk about this a lot with autistics, particularly PDAers. Autonomy does not mean independence. It means more that are my ideas being included? Even if we can't do my idea now, I would like to have it feel valued. I would like to have say over what's going on with me. So that's where you get a lot of us young ones who are autistic that just said no a lot. Because with young people, they tend to be kind of slotted from one thing to the next over and over and over again. Well, it turns out there's a lot of us that don't like that. We would like to be involved in that decision making. Assumed capabilities. Oh my gosh. I mean, especially with looking at the list on the right, there can be gaps in skills, and it can feel horrific to be amongst a group of friends, classmates. And it's well, you're 5, 7 years old now. You should be able to do this by yourself. And having to sit with how embarrassing that is or shameful that is, can make us feel, just awful, and obviously get really stressed out, because we'll be thinking, yeah, I should be able to do this, I guess. But there just might be something that actually needs to be, again, that word teased out. Like maybe there's a motor issue, motor apraxia, that we just can't use our fingers as well as maybe some of our peers that hasn't been looked at. Dyslexia, it's like 10% of the population. It's a huge amount of people. And yet is way under identified. And then going, I think we all know about the sensory stuff. It's kind of like buildup of triggers. And then the fun and confusing bit. Meltdowns can come from all those overwhelming emotions from tantrums. So that's where it can be a little bit confusing. But again, remembering that meltdowns is that dysregulation. They're in fight, flight, shutdown mode. It is the alarm system's activated and they're really dysregulated and can't make good, there just isn't any more good decision making. I think we're moving on to our scenario. And apologies for all the text on it. And then I thought if I just say it, it's hard to follow. And then I wanted a lot of detail about Jane for some reason. So Jane got picked up by her dad after school to go to her craft session. It's across town and oh my gosh, all the temporary lights, right? And there's a lot of traffic and Jane is so anxious about being late, hates to be late. And because she's so anxious, she forgets to have her snack, forgets to have her water. They finally pull up to the craft venue and she jumps out and she just runs in to go to start, throws her bag down, forgets to take her coat off. As she just finally is getting inside, the teacher's like, right, let's get started. As that happens, because Jane had just kind of haphazardly set her bag down, it falls off the bench and her stuff just goes everywhere. Oh, it's all over the floor. And everyone's looking at Jane and all her stuff on the ground. So all the kids go to the table. Jane's picking up her stuff. Jane normally likes to pick the seat by the window, but by the time she's picked up all her stuff, somebody else has already sat there. So she ends up joining, having to sit somewhere else. The teacher's already been chatting and talking people through the first part of the instructions. And then so the teacher tells people to get started. Jane starts, but then realizes she thinks she has made a mistake. And she ends up just like putting her arms down by her side and her head just hangs heavy. Her teacher tries to talk to her, call out her name, but she doesn't respond. And she just ends up with like her head on the table. I mean, yes or no's or thumbs up, thumbs out. I mean, first question is like, is your heart also going out to Jane? Like, the one point about like another kid sitting on her favorite chair. Oh my gosh, my older kid, like that would have been like the tip of the iceberg right there. Like, I just feel like my body clenching up. I know, right? Like there's so many things. It's like poor Jane is trying so hard. And so this is, yeah, everyone like just, I know it makes your heart just, oh, young people, anyone having a hard time is really difficult, isn't it? So we know this is in that meltdown arena, and particularly it's a shutdown. And how we know all this, there's a lot of internal and external factors going on. You know, she's probably hungry now, probably thirsty. This is me, I would hate it. I know, Lisa, me too. I mean, I don't even know what I would have done in this scenario, actually, if I would have like found myself in the bathroom or just like walked out and never returned and talked to these people again. And then she forgot to take her coat off. So we don't know if she's really overheating too. And then there's all that like embarrassment emotion. I mean, that's awful. I didn't put her age, but she sounds maybe like older primary school, secondary school. So, you know, really self-conscious. Someone's taken her seat. Oh, and then making a mistake. And then we know it's more than that shutdown because she's not responding to the teacher. And literally her body's just kind of, I just can't take it anymore. And you just like this feeling of just heaviness. And now she's lying in the table. When do meltdowns end? Well, that first point is about the person fatiguing themselves out. This is also one of those times where if a parent says, yeah, they have really epic tantrums and, you know, and arguments may, and then they just fall asleep, you know, or they have a really long nap. And that's often kind of that, again, of probably more of a meltdown just because you feel it like your whole being and they just take everything out of you and they really put you at that activated fight or flight. And then now all your hormones are just crashing out of you. They can also end if what's making you upset is taken away. So let's say there's a barking dog, that dog's taken away. That's helpful. Or if you're able to remove the person safely, particularly if there's someone able-bodied and you can go, nope, I don't like this. I don't like this crowd. I'm leaving. Really big on this list is co-regulation. This is where, again, of when people point to like, they just really get upset and really need me nearby. And it's like, yeah, they really need you to share that calming with them. That co-regulation is so important. So what should we be doing if we get into these moments of meltdowns? Because it's really overwhelming. The very first thing is always safety. So that's for you, that's for them, and that's for anybody else that happens to be there. So you might have to move locations, particularly for like by a road. I would say that that's kind of one of the only times, like if you're by a road, get away from a road. Other than that, moving the person is not advised. It can be then really upsetting because the person's not as aware of their surroundings, like we were talking about. So if you go to touch them and move them, it's really upsetting because you're not really putting together, like, why are they moving me? Why are they touching me? And I'm already overactivated. So that extra sensory input is really upsetting. And so we can imagine this happens a lot to kids in school settings when they're having meltdowns, and then staff come in and restrain them, and try to move them into their chill out rooms, which are really like a locked door kind of an area. That just escalates everything. And that's when you get really big aggressive behaviors, because that person who was already distressed now feels very unsafe and is going to fight you tooth and nail because they've already were in the activated alarm state. You've just proved to them that they're unsafe. So we try to just have everyone else leave. That way there's just not that audience. We don't have to be as embarrassed. And also, I mean, especially when they're siblings and stuff like that, they're just, who knows what they're going to do, and they can add a lot of sensory input. So we just try to ask other people to leave and separate if they're not part of it helping, and just really just staying with that person, making sure they're safe. You can get that feel, especially when you know someone a bit better, of would they want me to sit next to them and with them? Would they want me on the other side of the couch? Do they want me in just the other side of the room? And during this time, adding in anything you add in would be in more of an invitation, and usually around like that sensory input. So like maybe they have favorite fidgets, instant toys, or maybe there's a comfort item that you just kind of like put near them. Turning lights down low, just anything to make it feel safer and calmer. And for goodness sake, stop asking questions. My response in that way is basically because I would say that was the thing I had to talk to with a primary care teacher for my oldest all the time, which she'd be like, I asked him this, this, and this. How many times do you want to answer me? And I was like, he can't answer you. He just can't. And so we were talking about like that rational thinking isn't there. So trying to make decisions is just too difficult often. So what you do instead is just kind of put things nearby that could maybe be helpful as more of an invitation. And because this stuff this obviously was way out of their control. So we don't do any sort of rewards or punishment. It's just to help the person feel safe again and get them to a point where they feel calm enough to either rejoin, or maybe they don't want to. That's okay. And then maybe later on we would learn from it and figure out how to preempt this, or what other supports we want to have with us if the next meltdown were to happen. So going back to Jane in that scenario, so obviously it would have been really good had she had some food and drink in her. But during the moment when the teacher would have realized, oh, she's had, the shutdown, what should I be doing? So again, going back to that safety, they would be thinking, right, there might have been something on the table around Jane that needs to be removed. Maybe there's scissors, maybe something else sharp. So just making sure those things are away from her, and then calling like a water break, nap break for the other kids. Again, removing them so there's not these, variables. And for those people, the young people, it might be upsetting for them to see someone else in distress. So it's good to have them have actually a regulation moment off to the side, have a little snack, some water, and I'm going to stay with this person here. And the teacher would just do like we were talking about. Maybe Jane has some stuff on her or brings things with her that she likes, that's comforting, maybe not. And maybe the teacher can kind of suss out, should I stay closer to her? Should I be into the table? But just helping create a calm environment. And when Jane's able, we could just let her know, would you like to join? Just giving the option. And then later on, you could always talk to Jane and Jane's dad of asking, if that were to happen again, like what else could we have on hand to help you feel more comfortable faster, because that must have felt awful. I'm so sorry that happened. Yeah. And I think neuroscience book. Oh, I don't recognize the last name, but yeah, there's a lot of great ones. And I didn't touch on it because it's quite, a short webinar. But a lot that has to do, oh, sorry, I thought my kid was walking in. A lot that has to do with this idea around the co-regulation is all that polyvagal theory by Steve Porges. So, and that's all the trauma-informed theories. Yeah, all the stuff with neuroscience is like super relevant to understanding our behaviors and therefore how to support us. So thank you for throwing that one in. I don't know the last name, but I'll look up that one as well. And let's see, I think we're ready to go on to the next one. Yeah, so it's the last one with some text. So then I think I've timed it to where then I can get questions, which is great because ADHD is hard to edit. So I usually go over. But basically, all of these are distress behaviors. And with distress behaviors, it's telling us that there was something that was needed. So therefore, our job is just to help them feel safe, help them feel comforted, and use it as a learning opportunity to, again, discuss with them, like in the first scenario of what would have been safer options. And then in this last one of keeping that person safe and helping them get back to calm. And that's kind of it for the main part of the webinar. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. A Wednesday night, and we're talking about distress. So I always appreciate when people come in for some of the heavier topics. You can find me on social media. My email's there.